Hi K1s, welcome back to the virtual library. Let's see what book you have clicked on this time. You've clicked on Mr. Tool by Roger Hargreaves, one of my favourite Mr. Men stories. Mr. Tool was very, very, very tall. Quite the tallest person you've ever met. In fact, quite the tallest person you've never met, because you've never met anybody with legs as long as Mr. Tool's legs, have you? Have you ever met anyone as tall as Mr. Tool? Look how long those legs are. Now, the problem with being as tall as Mr. Tool is, life was just one long problem, as you can see. Poor Mr. Tool, he has to sleep with his legs in the air because he can't have a bed made long enough for his legs. Oh dear, he used to sigh. Oh dear me, I do so wish that my legs weren't quite so very, very, very long. He decided to go for a walk to think over his problem. He was just stepping over a tree when he heard a little voice. Hello? It was Mr. Small, standing underneath a daisy. But Mr. Tall was so tall he couldn't see him. So Mr. Small shouted at the top of his voice, Hello! But because he's so small, it's still so tiny. A Mr. Small shout is about as loud as a bee's sneeze, which I'm sure is very, very quiet. So it took quite some time for Mr. Tall to spot him. Oh, he said gloomily, it's you. Why don't? You don't look very happy, said Mr. Small. What's up? I am, replied Mr. Tall, because of these silly long legs of mine. Oh, said Mr. Small. Mr. Small decided to cheer him up. Let's go for a walk together, he suggested. So they did, which of course didn't work. It was like a giraffe going for a walk with a mouse. Somebody very tall and somebody very small. But then Mr. Small had a very clever idea, which did work. Can you see what he's done? Mr. Small's having a ride on Mr. Tall's head. And because of the length of Mr. Tall's legs, they were very quickly walked all the way to the seaside. Come for a swim, cried Mr. Small. I can't, said Mr. Tall. By the time it gets deep enough for me to swim, I'll be out the other side. So Mr. Small went for a swim, while Mr. Tall sat down with a face which was nearly as long as his legs. He really doesn't look very happy, does he? Mr. Tickle came along. Hello, he said. You look as if you need cheering up. Care for a tickle? No, thanks, replied Mr. Tall. What I would care for are some different legs. Mine are much too long. So are my arms, said Mr. Tickle cheerfully, but it's all the better for tickling people. And off he went, chuckling, looking for somebody to tickle. Be careful, look behind you. Is Mr. Tickle there? Is he coming to tickle you? He's looking for anybody to tickle. Mr. Nosy came along. Cheer up, he said. You look very down in the mouth. What's the problem? It's my legs, said Mr. Tall. They're too long. So is my nose, said Mr. Nosy, laughing, but all the better for poking into other people's business. And off he went, looking for something to be nosy about, looking for anything to be nosy about. Mr. Greedy came along. Hello, he said. You look gloomy. What's wrong? It's my legs, said Mr. Tall. They're too long. So is my tummy, said Mr. Greedy, but all the better for filling it with food. And off he went, licking his lips. Mr. Tall sat there and thought about Mr. Tickle's arms and Mr. Nose's nose and Mr. Greedy's tummy. He smiled. And then he grinned, and then he laughed out loud. He looked at his legs, those very, very, very long legs of his. All the better for walking, he said, and walked home in just 4 minutes. 40 miles in 4 minutes. Mr. Small came out of the sea after his short swim. And how am I going to get home? He asked himself. So he set off walking all the way home, 40 miles. Oh dear, that was last year. And he got home yesterday. Oh, poor Mr. Small. It took him so long to get home because he couldn't ride home on Mr. Tall's head again. Thank you for listening to our story, Mr. Tall. You might have some Mr. Men books or Little Miss stories at home too. There are many stories. Can you see on the back here all the different Mr. Men? Thank you for listening to the virtual library, K1s. See you again soon.